So hello, everyone. Welcome to Connecting the Dots, exploring the hormonal dynamics in fibromyalgia. As we all know, fibro is a full body disorder that can be categorized into so many different subsections, but throughout this talk, we'll dive specifically into the hormonal subsection of fibromyalgia and how interconnected our hormones are to every aspect of our well-being. And first things first, who am I? I'm a naturopathic doctor in Portland, Oregon. As I said, I recently graduated from the National University of Natural Medicine here in Portland. I have a bachelor's of science in philosophy and exercise and sport science from the University of Oregon and Oregon State, respectively. I'm currently working as a naturopath at One Space Healthcare, where I specialize in women's GI and hormone health, making today's topic right up my alley. As a naturopath, I really focus on empowering my patients with a thorough understanding of their own bodies, and I believe that this is very integral to our healing process. Beyond my medical practice, I host a women's health podcast, The Sassy Speculum, where I work to demystify complex health topics, ensuring that no one needs a medical degree to understand how and why their body functions the way that it does. I truly believe in the power of education and the importance of making medicine comprehensible to a wider audience. That's why I'm here today. And last but not least, I have no conflicts of interest. So let's start with just a generalized overview of the role that hormones play in fibromyalgia. This is a first stop, like, why should I care about hormones and fibro? We are all tired of hearing that we don't really know the exact cause of fibromyalgia. We know that it's not a one-stop shop kind of disorder. It's a disorder that really highlights the interplay between different systems of the body, and the holistic approach is necessary to fully understand fibro in and of itself. In addition to the widespread musculoskeletal pain, other systemic fibro symptoms are listed in this photo and also can include fatigue, orthostatic hypotension, which means getting dizzy when going from sitting to standing or when standing for prolonged periods of time, gastrointestinal complaints, brain fog, disrupted sleep, and much more. All of these symptoms directly equate to the symptoms of a hormonal imbalance, specifically a hormonal imbalance of the adrenal hormone axis. Further along this train of thought, individuals with fibromyalgia have an increased sensitivity to painful stimuli, which is thought to be due to alterations in our central nervous system's ability to process pain. Now, you may be wondering, what the heck does our ability to process pain have to do with hormones, and how the heck is this along the same lines as an adrenal hormone imbalance? The answer is everything, actually. Our ability to process pain comes from our sympathetic nervous system, most commonly known as our fight or flight response. This branch of the nervous system is governed by the release of two hormones, norepinephrine and epinephrine, which come from our adrenal glands. So our ability to process pain is actually a hormonal response at its core. Of course, there are other aspects that change our ability to process pain, but at its core, pain is a hormonal response. Our sympathetic nervous system, or SNS for short, as I said, most commonly referred to as our fight or flight response. It is one of a two-prong stress response system. It's an innate system. All of these processes are autonomic, meaning that we don't have any conscious means of controlling them. When our SNS is activated during a time of stress, our primal brain is preparing the body to survive something akin to a bear attack. Should we run or should we fight the bear? This is the Sophie's choice that our brain has every single time the SNS is activated, because that's its job, to keep us alive. Our pupils dilate in order to bring in more light. Our airways get bigger to allow more air into our lungs. Heart rate increases and blood flow is shunted away from the quote-unquote unessential organs in order to get more blood to our heart, lungs, brains, and muscles, to once again either fight or flee that bear. One of those unessential organs that loses a lot of blood flow is our GI tract. This is one reason why many people report a cottony mouth feeling from saliva drying up, or butterflies in their stomach, or the feeling of food turning into lead when they're acutely stressed. Our gastrointestinal tract isn't imperative to surviving the oncoming bear, so digestion becomes much lower on the priority list. Many fibromyalgia patients will say that their symptoms started after a significantly prolonged period of physical, mental, or emotional stress. Research agrees with this, that ongoing exposure to stressors is much more strongly associated with fibromyalgia and chronic pain in general than a singular traumatic event. That's not to say, of course, that a singular traumatic event can't be the straw that breaks the camel's back, because it totally can. But in general, prolonged stress of any type is often something specific that patients can relate their symptoms back to. But the question that I'm sure all fibro patients have asked is, why? That moves us to the second prong of our two-pronged stress response system, the HPA axis. This is a negative feedback loop between 3 different areas of the body: the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal glands. These 3 systems are always talking, always interconnected, but when stressed, the system releases cortisol, norepinephrine, and epinephrine from our adrenal gland. These are the 3 main hormones involved in a stress response, 2 of which were aforementioned as being released with the activation of the sympathetic nervous system. And this is accurate. Both prongs of the stress response system work in conjunction to create the fight or flight response that we've all experienced. So the HPA axis feedback loop is simply a bidirectional information highway between different parts of our brain and the adrenal glands. The hypothalamus, a region of our brain that's main job is to maintain our body's status quo through direct influence on our SNS and release of hormones. When the hypothalamus directs a stressor, it releases a hormone that goes directly into the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is the only region of our brain that has access to our bloodstream. So when the hypothalamus releases a hormone, that hormone doesn't immediately go into our bloodstream to affect other aspects of our body. That hormone is only available to the brain. It goes directly to the pituitary gland, whose main job is to regulate all of our vital and essential bodily functions, as well as general well-being. Because the pituitary gland maintains the control of being the only access point from the brain to the bloodstream, it controls pretty much all other hormone-secreting glands. In this case, we're talking about the adrenals, but the pituitary also controls the hormones released for our thyroid, kidneys, ovaries, and testes, to name a few. After the pituitary releases the ACTH hormone, this goes to our adrenals to inform them of our need to make more cortisol, epinephrine, and norepinephrine. So we've talked about epinephrine and norepinephrine and the traditional fight or flight bodily responses that they create when released from the adrenal glands, but we haven't talked much yet about cortisol. Cortisol is an incredibly busy hormone. It has multiple functions beyond just our acute stress response. It regulates our metabolism by controlling the use of fats, proteins, and carbs. It suppresses inflammation, regulates blood pressure, increases blood sugar, influences bone formation, and even governs our sleep-wake cycle. When it's released during an acute stressor, it provides an energy boost in order to keep us alive when we choose to fight or flee that bear. We've probably all heard the stories of people performing superhero feats, like a mother lifting a train car off of her infant. This is from that cortisol, also known as adrenaline, energy boost. As you can see, cortisol, and therefore stress, don't exist in a vacuum. Experiencing stress doesn't just affect your mood and energy, it also affects your gut and your entire GI tract, your thyroid, your metabolism, your sleep, or lack thereof, your basic ability to break down, absorb, and eliminate nutrients and toxins, and finally, it also affects your reproductive organs. Stress actually has its little grubby fingers in nearly every organ system within the body. So you can imagine if you're under chronic or prolonged stress that this is going to have an effect on every single system in your body. When we have a healthy amount of stress in our lives, cortisol acts as an incredibly potent anti-inflammatory hormone. We experience an acute stressor like our car breaking down on the freeway or being under a tight deadline at work, and our stress hormones increase. Then, once we've gotten through the issue, our cortisol and epinephrine go back down to baseline. However, when we're under chronic stress, we get multiple disturbances in that HPA axis feedback loop. The chronic stress leads to chronic circulating cortisol. This cortisol feeds back into the communication highway to our hypothalamus and pituitary gland, which suppresses the formation of the precursor hormones CRH and ACTH. When this happens, the body can swing one of 2 ways. Either continuously produce too much cortisol, which then causes a receptor blunting effect, reducing the effectiveness of cortisol, or the suppression of those precursor hormones can lead to a complete disruption in the production of cortisol, leading to a sharp decline in its production. Fibromyalgia is most commonly associated with a deficiency of cortisol due to reduced production or depletion at one or multiple levels of that HPA axis. Either way, with chronic stress, there is an apparent failure in the HPA regulatory axis feedback loop, causing a change in the manners in which we utilize all of our hormones. This is HPA axis dysregulation. The cortisol is no longer producing its anti-inflammatory effects, and it's no longer able to control inflammation at all, which leads to further HPA axis dysregulation. Take a look at the symptoms of HPA axis dysregulation. It looks pretty similar to the symptoms of fibromyalgia, doesn't it? I highlighted the most common fibro symptoms, but in all honesty, I probably could have highlighted all of them because all of these symptoms can and do occur in fibromyalgia. This is because fibromyalgia is an HPA axis dysregulation disorder. Even if your fibro didn't start out with a bout of prolonged stress, the physical and emotional demands that we all know of having fibromyalgia and chronic disease causes that same chronic stress pattern, leading to dysregulation in the production of hormones associated with the HPA axis. Basically, all humans with fibromyalgia would benefit from HPA axis re-regulation. You would think that with the amount of everyday stressors all humans experience, that we would have evolved out of this pattern by now. But unfortunately, evolution takes way longer than we'd like, and our hormonal axis regulation abilities still equate to our more primitive ancestors. We now know that the HPA dysregulation can contribute to multiple problems in multiple organ systems. The hypothalamus and pituitary are so central in governing many of our hormonal cascades. If there's an imbalance anywhere in that HPA axis, this could easily disrupt other hormonal axes. As you can tell by this picture, the hypothalamus and pituitary up at the top send out hormones to our muscles, ovaries, thyroid, in addition to our adrenal glands. So an imbalance of the HPA axis, in essence, means an overall mess of hormones, further exacerbating the previously mentioned problems, as well as adding to others. We're not going to get too caught up in the details here with the HPO axis now, but I wanted to demonstrate before moving into the sex hormones that this hormonal axis all starts with the hypothalamus and pituitary. Because everything relies on those two parts of the brain, you can see how a dysregulation anywhere in that bidirectional pathway of the HPA axis would interfere with multiple different hormone pathways. The HPO axis is in charge of regulating reproductive health and our reproductive hormones, which include estrogen and its metabolites, progesterone, and testosterone. Many have suggested that the major gender gap in the incidence of fibromyalgia is due to sex hormones, which makes sense. Women have much less testosterone, much more estrogen than men. In fact, most testosterone that women produce is actually quickly turned into estrogen and utilized as such. Also, the fact that the gender gap only appears when girls reach puberty strongly suggests that there is some sort of sex hormone involvement with fibromyalgia. The question is it the hormones themselves, or is it the quantity of the hormone in relation to others? As I mentioned earlier, no hormone exists in a vacuum. If one hormone is out of whack, there's another somewhere in the body that's compensating for that imbalance. And because of our menstrual cycles, women's hormones fluctuate every single day. If a man came to me and asked what I thought his testosterone levels were that day, I could probably guess fairly accurately knowing his age. But for women, all of our hormones fluctuate every day. So without knowing exactly where she was in her menstrual cycle, her health patterns, her age, what she's been through in her life, I couldn't even make a rough guess of what her hormone levels might look like. Many studies have failed to show a direct link between estrogen levels and pain tolerance, which is interesting because estrogen usually takes the spotlight in discussions about fibromyalgia and hormones. I'm going to challenge this, though, by going back to the question that I postulated earlier. Is it the hormones itself, or is it the quantity of the hormone in comparison to others? Estrogen and progesterone exist in a very tightly regulated ratio. When one is high, the other is low, except when it comes to menopause, and both drop off. Fibromyalgia in young women is often linked to estrogen dominance, meaning estrogen is dominating over that buddy progesterone. Higher progesterone levels have been very closely tied to the improvement of fibromyalgia pain, which makes sense as progesterone is anti-inflammatory and modulates nervous system activity while also serving as a neuroprotectant. If progesterone is being dominated by estrogen, it cannot exert those anti-inflammatory effects or help the nervous system to regulate its pain response. Estrogen, on the other hand, is extremely pro-inflammatory. When we have estrogen dominance, this increases our overall estrogen load, causing tissue damage and further promotion of pro-inflammatory mediators released at the site of inflammation. In fibromyalgia, the site of inflammation can be widespread throughout the body, meaning the whole body can become inflamed. Estrogen dominance is a very clear example of a HPA and HPO axis dysregulation. Because estrogen is made in both the ovaries and the adrenal glands, it's impossible to know which one is causing the problem, and the answer is probably both. High estrogen also has been associated with low cortisol, once again furthering the proof that no hormone exists in a vacuum, and fibromyalgia is a hormone-mediated condition. Regulate the hormones, and then you can regulate the symptoms. Interestingly enough, on the flip side of estrogen dominance is menopause. The opposite kind of estrogen dominance, it's the dropping off or decline of estrogen and progesterone. And many women with fibromyalgia have reported that symptoms get worse with menopause. The hormonal fluctuations during menopause create a scenario where the body is adjusting to a new hormonal baseline. This adjustment period can lead to increased stress on the HPA axis, potentially contributing to a dysregulation in the production of cortisol. As cortisol levels fluctuate or become dysregulated, that delicate balance in our stress response is further disrupted. This can manifest as increased sensitivity to pain, heightened fatigue, and challenges in regulating sleep, all hallmark symptoms of fibromyalgia. These two separate aspects prove that it's not so much the hormone itself that's the problem, but it's the quantity of the hormone, and most importantly, in relationship to those around it. Nothing exists in a vacuum. Hormones interplay with each other, and going back to our HPA and HPO axes, if one aspect of that axis is unbalanced or dysregulated, it will have both upstream and downstream effects. Moving on to the balancing act of progesterone and testosterone. While there hasn't been much evidence surrounding specific pain levels with estrogen, there has been quite a bit of research done on progesterone and testosterone. As mentioned before, progesterone is neuroprotective and anti-inflammatory, influencing our pain perception and contributing to our overall well-being. Think of progesterone as the Xanax of the hormone family. It calms everything down. Research has proven that due to the common estrogen dominance associated with fibromyalgia, progesterone is often very low in fibro patients, and evidence has shown increasing levels of progesterone does lead to improved pain outcomes in fibro patients. Testosterone, which is predominantly thought of as a male hormone, plays a vital role in women's health beyond its reproductive functions. Testosterone contributes to the overall intricate hormonal symphony governing pain perception and inflammation. Remember that in women, most testosterone is converted to estrogen. This follows in line with the fact that many fibro patients also have low testosterone, which has proven to be correlated with increased pain sensitivity going back to its anti-inflammatory roots. Testosterone plays an incredibly crucial role in regulating the body's pain response. But of course, it doesn't do this alone. It interacts with the other hormones and the other pathways, creating a ripple effect in the complex network of our pain modulation systems. One other thing that I forgot to note is that with estrogen dominance and hormone imbalances in general, the numbers don't necessarily have to be, frankly, low or out of range. What matters is where they are at in comparison to their related hormones. It's the ratio to its counterparts that matter most with all of our hormones. Let's continue moving on from our stress and sex hormones to another organ that is interconnected with both stress and sex. Our thyroid. Our thyroid is a little butterfly-shaped gland located in our neck that plays a pivotal role in regulating various bodily functions. One key aspect of thyroid health and fibromyalgia is the interconnection with an underactive thyroid or hypothyroidism, which leads to a myriad of symptoms, such as fatigue, muscle pain, cognitive difficulties, and constipation, to name a few. Symptoms that I'm sure we can all agree overlap significantly with fibromyalgia. In fact, thyroid conditions are often left unaddressed in fibro because often symptoms are just lumped into that fibro category without any further workup. Unaddressed hypothyroid can obviously exacerbate the already challenging symptomology of fibromyalgia. The thyroid produces hormones that influence our metabolism, energy production, and overall function of our organs. Disruption in that thyroid function, whether due to hypothyroidism or an autoimmune condition that affects the thyroid like Hashimoto's, can have cascading effects on the body's ability to manage stress, regulate energy, and modulate pain responses. The autoimmune component of thyroid dysfunction is actually particularly relevant in fibromyalgia as well. Hashimoto's is more prevalent in individuals with fibro because the autoimmune attack on the thyroid can create a pro-inflammatory environment in the body, increasing pain sensations. Our thyroid is also connected to the hypothalamus and pituitary gland, so an imbalance in thyroid hormones will upset the HP aspect of the HPT axis, once again further disrupting the HP aspect of both the HPA and HPO axes. It's a lot of HPs. No hormone imbalance basically exists on its own, and merely prescribing a medication to fix the thyroid imbalance is not enough. And that goes for fixing any hormone imbalance. It's not enough to just slap a Band-Aid over the situation and call it good. This is why so few quick fix treatments for fibromyalgia work. We need to address the entire axis in order for true symptom resolvement. As I mentioned earlier, if estrogen is dominant, it's dominant over another hormone, progesterone. The same can be said for all hormones, including the thyroid. because they all exist together in a symphony. It's not just that the trumpets are playing too loud, but that the flutes are playing too quietly. It's both sides of the coin. Here's a quick review slide indicating the common hormone imbalances associated with fibromyalgia that I've gone over today. We often see low cortisol, progesterone, and testosterone, and high estrogen and thyroid stimulating hormone. There are, of course, many more hormones in the body and many more imbalances possible. There have been studies that have shown many other hormone deficiencies and or surplus associated directly with fibromyalgia, but for the purpose of this talk, I couldn't fit them all in. So the question of the century is, what do we do about this? What are our next steps, and how the heck do we regulate all of these hormones at once? First things first, we have to regulate the sympathetic nervous system. We have to learn how to save the sympathetic nervous system for times of need and experience our parasympathetic nervous system a little bit more. While the sympathetic system is our fight or flight response, the parasympathetic is the rest and digest. This is what is active when we are at peace. We've all heard the tools to regulate the nervous system like mindfulness, exercise, eating a healthy diet, laughter, etc., etc. I could go on and on. While those things are, of course, incredibly important, I wouldn't be a naturopathic doctor if I didn't think so. But one thing that isn't talked about too much is vagal nerve stimulation. The vagus nerve is our longest cranial nerve. You can see in this blue picture on the right that it is huge. It goes from the brain all the way down into our abdomen. It's our longest cranial nerve. It is the gateway to the parasympathetic nervous system. It acts as a communication highway between our brain and our major organs, helping to regulate bodily functions and maintain our homeostasis, or that status quo. Stimulation of this nerve involves a targeted approach to promote a shift from the sympathetic nervous system dominance to parasympathetic activation, from fight or flight to rest and digest. Vagal nerve stimulation has been linked to a reduction in inflammation, obviously a key factor in many chronic conditions, including fibromyalgia. By dampening that inflammation, vagal nerve stimulation contributes to alleviating many symptoms associated with fibro. It also helps to lower heart rate variability, improve blood flow to our gut, kidneys, and bladder, therefore reducing GI and urinary symptoms associated with fibro. Stimulation can be done with certain breathing exercises and biofeedback techniques. Incorporating vagal nerve stimulation techniques on your own into your daily routine can be a very valuable aspect of managing acute fibro symptoms while your doctor addresses the intricate connections between all of your bodily systems and hormones. I saw a quote when doing research for this talk that said, "It's likely that fibromyalgia is a more composite of symptoms than a specific disease, so it's best to focus on alleviating symptoms rather than searching endlessly for a definitive diagnosis." In my professional opinion, this is very lazy healthcare. It's important to address the symptoms in an acute stage because no one wants to be in pain or uncomfortable, of course. But when a patient is facing a chronic disease, only addressing the symptoms is how we've found ourselves in this predicament of no one really understanding where fibromyalgia came from or why it exists. Your doctor should take the time to work with you to learn the ins and outs of your chronic condition so that they can use their clinical knowledge to figure out the why. That's why I went to medical school, so that my patients don't have to do all of their own research and guess the cause of their fibro or other chronic disease. For those of you out there who have fibro and haven't had a doctor really listen to you or really question your why, here would be the beginnings of my approach to figuring this out. You can present these ideas to your doctor, and hopefully they'll be open to digging a little bit deeper with you guys. I think lab testing is incredibly important, not just for figuring out where the hormone imbalance is, but to learn more about your inner chemistry of your body and understand where else inflammation could be coming from. This is kind of a starting panel of where I would start with labs. It would change patient to patient, but this is in general. And then once we get the hormone imbalances identified, you can start treating with supplements, herbs, lifestyle to regulate that HPA axis and address the nutritional needs to heal from the inside out. I also put on this slide one of my favorite adages. If you are diagnosed with a chronic disease like fibromyalgia, and your doctor gives the diagnosis and says something along the lines of, "Here are your treatment options, but there's not really anything else that we can do. It's symptom management from here on out," or something like that, it's most definitely time to find yourself a new doctor, because that's not healthcare. The conversation should never be over once a diagnosis is reached, and you deserve better. These are my resources. That's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for showing up and listening to my talk.